G'day everyone and welcome to this week's very special edition of the Melbourne Pro Punters panel. Brought to you by One to Follow, as usual, Darren Potter.
Juppy.
Potts, and we've got a very special guest this week on the eve of the AFL season. Former Collingwood Premiership player, Mick McGuire.
G'day Juppy, how are you mate? Pleased to meet you.
I'm good.
Welcome aboard, Mick.
Good to see you.
I was certain he was going to describe you as a Carlton.
I'll
take either.
Well, Collingwood Premiership player, but also coached up in a couple of premierships up in Gisborne, didn't you? And now coaching at Keilor, where you've had a heap of success down there, so you're still heavily involved in the game. But not only that, you've had a background betting on, like the rest of us, Mick, betting on the races and enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely, Juppy. I've always been ingrained in the racing fraternity. I remember my dad, at 10 years of age, had a horse called Pagoda Queen. Noel Kelly trained it.
Yep.
And we had a great connection with Noel Kelly, the great from Ballarat, the Ballarat area. And we had a horse called Pagoda Queen come down to Melbourne. Brent Thompson rode her as a 2-year-old. She won the Silver Jubilee Stakes. The same day family man beat Raffendale when I was 10.
Wow.
And from that day, I was just ingrained in racing because of the excitement on my dad's face, my mum's. All his brothers were involved in the horse. We all went back to Tommy McGuire, who's unfortunately not with us today. But we all went back to their place and celebrated long and hard into the night, as the parents tended to do, and we as kids, we just went for the ride. And I remember having 50 cents each way on her, and we didn't know whether she'd won. 3 horses, or probably 5 horses, went across the line. It was a short half head by a short half head, and Pagoda Queen by Taipan 2, won by a short half head from Belrose and New Rose, and I still remember it vividly.
Wow, that's a great memory. And that passion you've got for racing always come through in the stuff you did on the radio?
Yeah, well, I loved it. I loved the 3 codes.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to have a Melbourne Cup winner in the Greyhounds.
All right.
And that was just because of sheer coincidence. We fell across a dog called Fair Sentence with Caesar Costa, who was the trainer, and he was synonymous with some greyhound success out of the Cranbourne, Devon Meadows area. And a mate of mine, Paul Hawke, who played at Sydney and Collingwood, and 3 of my mates up home from Ballarat, where I grew up, the 2 Hanson boys and Tony Walker, we decided to pay $600 each for the $3,000 investment. And this dog ended up being the first dog we've ever purchased and still the only dog I've ever owned. And went on to win a Melbourne Cup. It was just incredible. Just one of those successful journeys, and also growing up as a young kid, my mum's dad, Ernie Lillis, he trained greyhounds at an early age, and I used to be one of those young kids that want to get 20 cents to go and catch it in the catching pen and bring the greyhound back to my granddad.
And there was also, I can remember as a youngster going to Horsham to catch a few dogs, and I'm sure this young man would have caught a few dogs at Ballarat too. I can remember, he probably looks a little bit like he does now. There was a very thin svelte Plugger Lockett there, often in the catching pen at those tracks catching dogs, and he's had a long association with the game, and it was good to see him on the news last week.
No, it was fantastic.
He's looking brilliant.
He's a superstar Plugger, a misunderstood person, a great football person. I love his dad. Howard Lockett's a sensational person in Ballarat. And I've just got great respect for the whole family, to be perfectly frank. Plugger used to play at North Ballarat. I played at Sebastopol. He was always top age when I'd come up from the next junior grade down. He was always captain. I eventually become captain of my underage group. But it was interesting, one day we were playing a game of footy, North Ballarat under-16s versus Sebas under-16s at Sebas Oval, and Plugger had kicked their first 7. I'd kicked our first 7. He kicked our 8th and I missed to kick 8 each, and that was the scoreline sort of going into the second quarter. It was just one of those days, and once he got his name read out to be a St Kilda player, I was in St Kilda's zone. A lot of people thought likewise that would be the case, and it didn't happen to turn out that way.
And probably the purest kick of the footy just about anyone's ever seen, Plugger, and it's good to see that he's doing some work, even if it is just once a fortnight with those blokes up in Sydney, because you couldn't have a better teacher teaching people how to kick a footy.
Well, the thing about, I've always sort of trying to align kids I coach just head, hand, foot. I reckon it's a simple alignment, it's a simple message, it's a good trigger for a kid. You see ball drop with kids or outside the line of their leg, or their head's to their left and their balancing arm's not right. So if you get the symmetry between your head, your hand and your foot, generally you become a good kick in footy. And let's face it, it's called football for a reason. We use our feet. And that's the most important thing that young kids have got to learn at a young age. And when you talk about Tony Lockett, to get vision of him kicking for goal, or even as a field kicker, he was elite. He was very patient on the ball. He never rushed himself. He had a simple routine. It was always balanced, and I've always been a believer. Good kickers are always very well balanced, and Plugger certainly fills that bill.
before we crack on with more sort of footy stuff, we'll have a look back at Saturday at Flemington. Funnily enough, we've raced on that same track for 3 weeks in a row, but there was no blow up from the press this week about the track. It played beautifully. It just shows that if you let Mick Goody go, that's what's. There might be some times where there might be minor issues, but we had none whatsoever on Saturday. It was beautiful.
Beyond all doubt, Juppie, that the noise that was created over the previous weeks was simply about the fact that there was an inside section that's different grass that he'd mown a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
It looked tighter because it's a different type of grass. It doesn't grow up.
It grows out
as much, because the track on Saturday it raced the same.
Yeah.
Okay. There were 4 straight races. Ignore them. Just look at the 5 circle races in isolation. They were won by. Duke of Ellington come from midfield. Strike Force was outside the lead. Palantino sat in the box seat, right on the heels of the leaders. Hell of a street led. The Answer My Friend led. So
they're all there.
They're all there, but I'd say the track raced fair.
Yep.
Raced quick. It was good, quick, exciting racing, and they were tempo related, and the best horses come to the fore. So, it just makes you wonder what all that nonsense was about. And there's just no need for it.
Yeah, it's one of the great conundrums in racing, isn't it? I reckon they got one of the hardest jobs. Now, I wouldn't know how to plant a seed, let alone make sure you got the grass right, and then know what to do in relation to how much water you put on it if it's not natural rain. And that's one of the great things that these blokes have to get paid the big bucks for, I suppose. But in reality, no one's forcing you to bet.
That's exactly right.
No one actually says, today's a day, we're racing in Flemington, and generally most punters, and we all talk through our kick at some stage. But that doesn't force you to have a bet. No. There's always the sun will come up tomorrow and there'll be a different race meeting somewhere else where it might suit you, and you wait a bet.
It's the key thing that the punter has over the bookmakers. The bookmakers have to put up a price on everything.
Yeah.
Whereas as a punter, we don't have to take any of the prices. We can have the day off, you can have the week off, you can have that race off. Doesn't make any difference. So always keep that in the back of your mind, punters, because it's a key thing. If you don't like a race, you stayed out of a couple there on Saturday, didn't you, Potts, where you just...
Unfortunately.
Yeah. We'll get to those.
So anyway, look, I keep stats on all the meetings, and we've had very little rain in Melbourne over the past 3 months, really. Until the last, maybe the 24 hours just gone, and the next 24 hours we might have a bit. But across Victoria, a lot of those meetings are populated by small fields, right? So I want to make that. And when I say on pace, I mean the first 4 horses. But on-pace runners have been winning about 60% of races over the past 3 months in Victoria, across all tracks. It's very unusual to find more than half the meeting won from runners outside those first 4 positions. And it's because the tracks have had very little rain. The best horses tend to take up those positions because they want to take luck out of play. And the tracks are running quick, so the leaders can keep going. So
it sounds probably naive by a lot of people out there that bet for the sake of betting. In some cases, I prefer the angle of where we're talking from here because it sets up a race profile that you can bet confidently with. Yeah. Now, the Answer My Friend on the weekend clearly looked the leader, got pressured in front the previous start, hang tough, just got beat by a horse that was absolutely airborne and still is Mr. Sneaky. Whereas you could say, where was Tosin Snarden in the scheme of things? Awkward barrier 4, was he going to push forward? Where was Palantino? Flemington, back at Flemington, that's his track, grows a leg there, we all know that. And then you look at, say, some of the sprint races, P. Maloney's just got this affinity with Rich Charm to the way I think the horse should be ridden. It has to be ridden cold, so it uses that great acceleration and turn of foot that it has got to give yourself every chance if you want to be held up, cluttered, and then if the brakes open up, you know it's going to finish the race pretty strongly. So there was probably elements of predictability amongst the meeting, I felt, on the weekend, and if you betted towards those predictabilities, you could get your pockets full. But if you just want to go in at a win and bet for the sake of betting, that's when you end up with, more or less the holes out of your pants.
Yeah, there's something I just want to touch on with something you mentioned there, Nick, and Potts will have to follow up on this. I got a message from Kevin Skeen, who's at Track Data on Twitter, does a great job up there in Sydney. He says, "Hi Anthony, a question for a future show, possibly aimed at Mick Goody or another course curator. I understand how rainfall is measured at racecourses, but how do racecourses measure the irrigation levels? Is it a matter of dividing the amount of water delivered by the sprinklers trucks with the actual racetrack ground space, or is there another method used, and do all racecourses use the same method?"
I can answer this. I'm sure they all use the same method, but they put a rain gauge in front of the irrigator. You know what I mean? So the guy that's running the irrigator will collect it and empty it, bring it back, and just keep checking all the way around to make sure that nothing's varied, and he's controlling the speed of that the irrigator moves.
Yeah.
To make sure it stays the same.
Okay, so hopefully that answers the question, Kev, where there's
so you put the irrigator on the ground in front of the irrigator.
Yep.
The irrigator will come over it, then you'll run around the back, collect it, measure it, then go back and do it again.
Yep.
All the way around.
So that's how they do that. I didn't actually know that, so thank you for that, Pods. So yeah, there was some interesting racing there. We'll start with the Palantino race. I was down at Geelong on Saturday. You could have fired a gun through the joint and not hit anyone. There was not too many there. But I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm watching them take $1.60 toss and start them, and I thought there shouldn't be this gap between this and Palantino. Like just knowing the two horses, and of course didn't have enough range to back Palantino, did I?
I mean, on reflection, it's a great example of the market. People just getting spooked by the market.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, so there was I would think there was obviously some sort of push coming out of the stable.
Yeah.
Take some starters. That information sort of tends to flow through, and then everyone just assumes that Palantino's off. And he's a great Flemington horse. He was going to get a good run. It turns out even despite the small field, they ran pretty solid.
They looked like they were going at a reasonable clip.
With the Williams horse going to the front. So Palantino just did his thing and had a better base underneath him than Taysom Stardom, and the price on reflection is amazing.
Anyway. Where to with Toss and Stardom, do you reckon, Potts? Would they bother taking him to Sydney now, or?
I don't know.
And
he's not a horse I've got a handle on. He's obviously got a lot of talent, but
yeah,
I just don't know. Maybe the first up run might have flattened him. I mean, that's sort of clutching at straws a bit though.
Yeah, he was quite good against Blackheart Bar, wasn't he? First up,
he was very good.
The way the D-wear factor when the money comes for those horses, you generally sway to where the money's going.
Yeah.
And I think that seduces a lot of people to take under the odds what a horse should be. Yeah. Particularly when he's got 2 or 3 runners in one particular race. If the money trend's there to follow one particular horse that's well back, the others will markedly get out in the marketplace. And there was this massive shift with Palantino, but as Potsy rightfully pointed out, we know the horse just grows a leg at Flemington. What is it, 3 from 3 there?
His Flemington records, if you just look at his Flemington range in isolation, he's an outstanding
really
horse. When he lost a race on protest.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh no, that was good. That was the protest payer. No, that was good. 2 winners for the price of 1 there. Finally. You mentioned Rich Charm there, guys. It was a good race. We were sort of on Shadow Cheval Pots, and
we did save on Rich Charm, which was something. But again, it's one of those things. I look at a reflection that makes perfect sense to me.
Yep.
Rich Charm had a fast base from Caulfield to build on. There was everything pointing to Rich Charm running a new career peak.
And on the fresh side?
Off that really fast race at Caulfield with a bit of enough of a gap between runs to not be flat. And he's just really run up to it. Whereas Shadow Cheval was coming off that super fast race at Sandown with less of a gap between runs, and she's just run a bit flat. And in hindsight, I look at it and say, I made a bit of a blue there. I should have had them a lot closer together.
What price you mark Rich Charm?
$5.50, I think. I might the winner 2 to 1. So,
okay.
Sorry, I might Shadow Cheval 2 to 1, and I think it was might have been $6. But anyway, it was backable.
Yeah.
Rich Charm, and he's the best. Palantino side, obviously a higher class race, but of the straight races, Rich Charm's clearly the best of the day, and
she was going to win a long way out. Pete Maloney's just got the affinity with the horse too, I think.
It's just some that you pair them up.
Pair them up and they just grow, they jump out of the ground. And you just get him to know what Rich Charm seems to be comfortable with. Just let it flop out the back, get it balanced up, and we know it's got to turn the foot on dry ground.
I think Verstappen's probably that run will really
top him off.
It's a great platform for him to really peak next third up.
And that's something we mentioned before the show, Pots. We're getting into that time of the season now where we're in sort of change mode. We're at the end of the autumn. We're not really into the winter stuff yet, so the form's a little bit mixed. So
I used to live in Sydney.
Hello, Nathan. It might be a horse that we can follow over the next couple of weeks that might have it on some of these horses that aren't quite fitting up a horse like Verstappen. There might be wind coming up in here.
Yeah, you're rightly to point that out, Juffy. It's a tricky time in the form cycle. Probably even from the Saturday, because we've got Mornington and Bendigo.
So how does that impact on you, just from an education standpoint, Potsy, in the view that horses are probably a lesser grader coming in, those that are just about to finish their autumn preparations are about to go out, and they clash? how does that affect your price markets? How does that affect you doing form?
Well,
what angle can you give to the uneducated out there in terms of developing them to actually invest so we continue to look at turnover?
So in those periods, I tend to be just a little bit softer on, not as aggressive with the pricing. You know, like particularly if there's a lot of runners that have a range in the race. You know what I mean? Like their expected level of performance is a 3 or 4 length range, whereas when you get to dip like a more predictable point in the form cycle, you sort of can get each horse down to like a 1 or 2 length variable. Whereas at this time it can be up to 5 lengths. You know what I mean? And
there might be trials for that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of touch and feel in it, and in the end you've got to take a position, and you accept that you could be wildly wrong.
Yeah.
So you're just not as aggressive with your pricing. So even if you've got a horse that's...
So what would you tend to get your markets to in that situation?
Well, I still nap it 100%,
yeah.
But I won't be, like, if I'm really sure, like, just say there's a whole bunch of runners in a race where their form's well exposed, it's a very tight range what they're going to do, and there's a horse that's got a length on them, I'll be very aggressive with that horse and I'll mark it as short as I possibly can and then work back from there.
Yeah.
Whereas here I just won't be as aggressive with that top pick because the range of the horses that could potentially finish somewhere between a length in front of it or 3 lengths behind it, I'm less sure about it, so I just won't mark that horse as short and I'll work back from there. And you've got to use more market intelligence at those meetings.
Yep.
And as we said, it is tricky because, as you say, we're going to Mornington, which is a completely different track to what we've been used to racing on. And then Bendigo, and Bendigo's probably Bendigo's raced really well, I feel, for the last few months. I think Bendigo are doing a great job up there with their track. And it's probably a little bit more realistic to the city form that we've seen for the last little while, but it does mean that over the next few weeks that form's going to be coming out of those meetings, and it is a little bit mixed. So it does make it a little bit tricky.
So I'll be going down to Mornington on either Thursday or Friday to walk the track.
Depending on the weather?
Yeah, well, the weather's okay later in the week, I think.
Oh, that'll be good. It means I won't get wet through for a change.
It's not hot, and I've walked Mornington before. I'm sure the track will be presented in good order. But in the week after, I'll be going to the Bendigo, which will be the first time I've ever set foot on the Bendigo track. I'm really looking forward to that because it is a track I've had trouble getting a handle on, and there's something about that track that I think's going to become apparent when I walk it. But that's the only way to find out. There's just a little trick to that track. I'm not quite sure what it is, and it does make it difficult when you're watching videos there because it's a strange video angle.
Yes.
It tends to be a little bit head on, a little bit like Hawkesbury. Sydney views where you think a certain horse is in front, and then as they come into the last 50 metres, it all
the outside. You got to bring the outside right up. Yeah.
It's a really tricky.
And the boys will look forward to speaking up there. Pods, they're a great bunch of boys up there at Bendigo. I've got a bit of time for them.
All the track teams are great.
Yeah, they are.
I haven't ever spoken to the ones at Werribee, but everyone else has been.
Wow, they
might be really good too.
They've got a high fence though, Pods. Well, that'll just about do us for part 1. We'll be back with part 2 where we'll have a bit more of a chat with Mick and we'll talk a bit of footy as well. So we'll be back in a moment.